Jonathan, thanks for your time. You are an expert in business operations, leadership and culture, an executive coach and peer group facilitator with Vistage, the world's largest CEO peer group. You've also previously been an avocational Dale Carnegie instructor for 25 years.
Yeah. The thing about culture, though, is that if you have 5 people in a company, even though it's smaller, you have a better chance to get into one culture. But there could be initially 5 different cultures. So you have 25 people. You can have, each team might have their own culture. Leaders are all over the company. Everybody has an opportunity for leadership. And I think that's probably that a leader up the chain would say, how do I get other people to be better leaders? How do I help people to have more initiative?
Jonathan, thanks for your time. Really appreciate you making the trip.
Absolutely.
You are an expert in business operations, leadership and culture, an executive coach and peer group facilitator with Vistage, the world's largest CEO peer group. You've earned the title or designation of Master Chair 6 years in a row, and that's only awarded to the top 10% of Vistage chairs in the world. You have a direct impact with over 90 leaders in the St. Louis community through your role with Vistage, and you've also previously been an avocational Dale Carnegie instructor for 25 years.
Yeah.
So needless to say, you have an extensive business background and, in my words, or in my opinion, a major role in the St. Louis business community.
Yeah, thank you. That's my focus is how do I make St. Louis better?
I'm sure when you were growing up in St. Louis, you weren't thinking about being in the position you're in today. So if you don't mind, could you give me and the listeners, viewers, some background on where you grew up and how you grew up?
Yeah, I think I was a military brat, and so born in Montana. My family moved, I think, within 3 months to France, and then we were in Denver, and then we were in Chicago. But in second grade, we moved to St. Louis. So we moved in the city of Ferguson. A lot of people hadn't heard about that city before. They have now. Great middle class family. Youngest of 4. And so what I found interesting, especially since you have a lot, since a lot of people have heard the challenge of Ferguson, what I look at is I had a great way where I grew up, and I had a great community, great church that I was involved with, a lot of different things that I was involved with, and it was really just a good upbringing, and I learned a lot. If I go back and look at that after going away from St. Louis and then moving back, I see a lot of changes, and I love St. Louis, and I'm learning more and more about the community over the years. The challenge that I had, and which kind of drives me to where I am, is that a lot of things that I was a part of, are no longer there. The Boy Scout troop that I was a part of is no longer there. The church that I was a part of, I would go back and see my mom, and it's still there. It's just not what it was. It's not as big. There was whenever I would go back, people would be a little older and a little grayer, same people, and then a fewer. Some of the old established businesses are no longer there, and you can see that in a lot of places. But I think I learned that's real life. But what stuck in my head is what's changed, why, and then what could be better. And a lot of things that I've done, I said, how do we strengthen our community, and how do we strengthen? And I look at St. Louis and some of the changes, and how do we strengthen that? And when I looked at, in a lot of things that I've done, I find that there are 2 main things that we need to have better. We need to have better schools. I think our youth are the strength in what we do. They're the future. They're always going to be the future. They always have been the future. I went to great schools, and now I want to make sure that other kids have that. And then the other thing that is my main strength is leadership. I have been a leadership nerd of just digging in on what's going on to leadership, how to be a better leader, what could be better. And I see that when things do not go as well, it's because there's been a lack of leadership, a lack of focus, and a lack of connection.
I appreciate you sharing that. So when you mention some of the changes you've seen, are you referring specifically to Ferguson, North County, or just the St. Louis region as a whole?
I think it's the St. Louis region in whole. I think it became a little more personal because I look in terms of where I grew up and how that is perceived, and it's never as bad as it is. I know that I will bring people in. We have speakers at Vistage that come in, and I'll drive them up to where I grew up and the different aspects of Ferguson, which is a suburban community, and I show them, and they go, "Oh, this is not what I expected." I go, "It looks like where I grew up," and I go, that's true. Even before what happened with Michael Brown, as I was listening to a lot of that disruption, I used to say, this could happen anywhere. And it happened in Minnesota, it happened in Baltimore, some of the negatives, but it doesn't make them a bad community. You hear the challenges that happened in Portland. I went to Portland not that long ago, and Portland's a beautiful town and a beautiful city. There's just the disruption that comes in. That it come in. So I'm looking at this from all of St. Louis, because there's some great institutions that are not around, and there's some things that are not there in downtown or in West County or the Kirkwood area. But there are other things that take its place.
I was lucky enough to go on one of those tours with you. And I would 100% agree that Ferguson and North County in general is not what I pictured in my mind, just given, the media and things like that. And it has the bones to be an incredible part of the region. I think it is a very strong and stable part of the region. And you mentioned Kirkwood. Ferguson reminded me of Kirkwood.
It looks like it's very similar. They're both rail towns.
Yeah, and I totally see how that could happen anywhere, and that the negative perception that we get as a region can really happen to any city. I mean, you see it with Chicago. Chicago's a great city, but if you were to only pay attention to the media, you would think you have to wear a bulletproof vest if you go to visit Chicago. And that's obviously not the case.
Right.
So you mentioned leadership as well, and leadership being something you're passionate about. If I'm not mistaken, a lot of your early leadership skills or training came through the U.S. Army. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say the Army was key, but I think it was also when I was growing up, I was involved in my church, and I was involved in my church youth, and I became a leader within my youth group. There are other youth organizations that I became a part of. I would volunteer to do things, and then all of a sudden I became a leader. I have this tendency of always thinking that everybody else around me is smarter than me, and then I find myself doing things, and I don't think I'm any smarter than anybody else. If I have an initiative, I would do that, and so that was kind of my push was initiative. And then when I went to college, I got active within my fraternity, and then nobody was running for a student government office for my fraternity, and so I ran for sophomore year, my junior, the vice president of the student government, and I won, and it was like that initiative, but it was more than that. I mean, when we're young and we do those things, there's so many things that we don't know. And I would say the key to success is I think I'm lucky to have good mentors like my dad or other men and women that were around me. Going into the military, though, the military taught me a lot because the military is mission focused. In our military, you're always growing other leaders. As a lieutenant, you're trying to lead and work with the enlisted folks to have everybody become a better leader and up the chain. Because if you lose somebody, you got to be ready for that next position. As a lieutenant, you got to be prepared to take over the role that the captain is doing if something happens to the captain. So the military is conscious of developing future leaders. So they teach all different aspects, put us in a variety of different situations that we can learn. I was never in a position of going into a war, but it was my mindset was they were teaching us to lead in case something where we were in a situation where we had to defend the country or defend somebody else.
That makes a lot of sense. And the switch from being in the military to becoming an executive coach or consultant, I'm sure wasn't something that happened overnight. So what was that transition period like for you, or when did you first enter the private sector?
Yeah, I would say after I left the military, I was blessed to go to a company called EDS, the company Ross Perot had, that valued military people. One of the things that Ross is known for is that he had two employees that were stuck in Iran in the late 70s that when the Shah was overtaken. And Ross created a bunch of his employees that were former military and had them extract their leaders, a private citizen, because the U.S. government wouldn't. So he respected people with a military background. And we were very hard driving. We're an IT company. It doesn't make sense that my background is IT, and computer science and math. I do executive coaching and leadership. That's what I do now. But it was from those experiences, from being a part of a team, leading a team. At EDS, they were really big at creating leaders. They created their own leadership development program. Every new leader that had a conscious decision that they wanted to be a leader was assigned a mentor within the company. And we had mentors that help us, and they taught us different things that we needed to do, as simple as you need to get to know your people, and that was before you learned anything else that you were on the job. So there were a lot of different roles that I played there, working in different leadership. They trained me on strategic planning. That part, and while I was at EDS, I took the Dale Carnegie course, which really changed my life in a lot of ways, is human relations and public speaking. I don't think I was extremely polished, and it taught me how to deal with people, how to listen more. And so after taking that, I ended up teaching it. And while I was in a leadership position, and then Dale Carnegie sent me they had me audit a leadership class. And everything that was in the class that they were teaching were things that I understood from my time at EDS in terms of the way that they developed leaders. And it was almost second nature to me. So that blessing of being a part of an organization that focused on developing leaders made it easier. So I was about 5 years in, and for the 20 years later, I was a lead leadership instructor for Dale Carnegie on leadership. And so while I was teaching it at the same part, I was getting different leadership positions in different companies and in the different changes. So EDS was a hard driving company. EDS was bought by General Motors, which I looked at it as the longer you're there, a seniority company. And that culture is that the longer you're there, the more power you get. We did an outsourcing engagement with Southwestern Bell, which had different levels of I would call that a hierarchical culture. We bought McDonnell Douglas Systems Integration, and I moved from the General Motors over to that, and that had a military background, so I understood that particular culture. That's when we did the Southwestern Bell thing, which got me to understand that area. And I left EDS, and I left the reason why most people leave a company. It wasn't, I loved the company. I missed what it was. But what I didn't love was my boss. And I had a bad boss, and most people leave because of their boss. Reinforced that aspect of lessons learned about leadership. And from there, I went into billing to companies that did billing software that was involved with organizational change or getting people to do a lot of that. But in the billing software, it was billing for telecom for long distance, local distance. The internet was integrating with it. Cable was integrating with it. And so I would work with companies that were all different in their cultures. I would say the local telephone companies, I'm a stereotype is what it was. You had ladies, 50-year-old ladies in green pantsuits that were the polyester pantsuits that were there. You had the long distance companies where you had the guys with blue suits and the yellow or red power tie that they were out there trying to sell their product. Cable companies were the polos and the khaki pants. The internet people were in piercings and black shirts, and they would cover their cubes up where they didn't have anybody look, you couldn't have any light in there, and they were looking at their screen. It was just fun to watch those different companies being different, which got me intrigued on culture and how you lead a little bit different, but there's still an element of the same. So I looked at my venture into coaching, I focused first on culture. And with that background in the strategic planning, I did strategic planning for some of these companies. I did the EDS taught me strategic planning, how we were going to continue our relationship with Southwestern Bell and that relationship grew. And then I applied it in some of the other companies. And so when I left the billing software company, I ended up using it. And so I would do strategic planning for a lot of companies. And some of my former Dale Carnegie clients were a part of it or others. And then I would have companies say, will you help us execute the plan because it's hard? So I would execute it through culture. And I would learn and read more about culture. And that student, I would say I was more of a student than I was a leader, but I would apply. And it would, some of the people that I worked with 20 years ago are still executing on those plans and have just amazing culture. That's a lot of pride in what I have.
That's incredible. So in terms of just the timing, was most of that in the 90s, early 2000s?
Yeah, most of that was EDS was in the late 80s, early in all the 90s. Because I was remembering the billing software world during Y2K. And then I went out on my own in 2001, which was really a kind of a great time to go out on your own, because I'm being facetious here, because 9/11 did have a potential negative impact and later did have an impact just because of the way things were. But, persistence made a difference. Yeah.
When you went off on your own, how difficult was that for you going from, let's say, a more structured corporate environment to really being an entrepreneur and needing to bring the clients in as well as deliver on their expectations?
Well, the easy part was that first major client that I had was a 4-month gig, and then I was going to get a job. It turned into a 7-month gig, and then it turned into an 18-month gig. As they learned of the things that I could do, and the company that bought the company that I was working with was having to do another change, and they saw what I did, and so I was doing that. I had 7 months with no income after that. I thought I was looking in a job between 2003 and 2002 and 2003. I ended up meeting a lot of people. And in the early days as an entrepreneur, you have to sell. It was in a difficult time, but that persistence, what ultimately happened was I started getting hired to do some projects, and they were successful. And then I would get hired for more. And then all of a sudden I recognized I wasn't looking for a job. I was a consultant.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like it was pretty organic.
It's all organic. There's a lot of luck and talking to other people and asking for help or connections with other people. And then you kind of learn your tribe and the people that you're out there, and those that appreciate you will share it with other people. I think that's with any entrepreneur. It's like you have one success and then you try it again with somebody else, and then all of a sudden you've got something.
One of your key areas of focus is developing leaders, and that's work you've been doing throughout your career as well as in Vistage today. I was a member of one of your Vistage groups, and I learned a ton, got a lot of value out of it. It helped to propel me further, not only as an entrepreneur, but as a leader. What are some important aspects of leadership, or maybe some areas of focus for leaders to kind of narrow in on or focus on if they want to become better leaders? What, in other words, are there, and I know this isn't easy to answer, but are there some general rules or some general guidance for leaders? Because I feel like a lot of leaders, myself included, that are put into leadership positions, they may not be groomed for it in the same way that you may be groomed for it in the military or in a corporate environment. So if someone wants to become a better leader, where should they start? I guess is a better way of asking that question.
I think the first question is, do they want to be a leader? I think does it interest them? I think what we end up doing is we say, hey, you need to go to this step, or you need to go to this step. And then after you do this, then you need to be a supervisor. And after you do this, you need to be a manager. And after you do this, you need to be a director. And then you need to be a vice president. That was kind of my drive within EDS. And I think it was the right fit for me for where it was, but I don't think it's for everybody. And I think the first thing you need to look at is, what are you really good at? What do you really enjoy? So when I've been teaching leadership, besides, the Dale Carnegie, I would teach this, and now we have an emerging leader program within Vistage I start a new 2-year cohort every year. And this first thing I say to them is, if you don't like people, you probably don't need to be in leadership. That it's okay to be a really good salesperson. It's okay to be a really good accountant. It's okay to be a really good whatever you really enjoy doing. And if you're really good at that, and if you see yourself wanting to help other people, then you should focus on that. So understanding who you want to help is an important aspect, because you might want to help customers. And you're a leader. Those people that are doing customer service are leaders for their customers. If you have somebody in an apartment that's a tenant and they have a maintenance person or somebody that they call, if you can help them, they're doing a little bit of leadership. So a leader should be focused on is how many people do you want to help? If you want to help more, my drive was, as a computer programmer, was how do I have impact? Well, then I needed to be an analyst because I could impact more in terms of the way that things were designed. And then I could be a supervisor because I could impact more and listen to the next level. When in the management, it was the more I understood above, I had a drive to help more people. So it was consciously, how do I learn more about that? I did a lot of reading to keep myself focused on that so that I could grow faster than maybe the company was expecting from me.
Do you think a leader has to be a manager? So in other words, for someone to be a leader of a company, do they need to be able to manage people or willing to manage?
You're going to go up the chain and have people report to you, yes. But leaders are all over the company. Everybody has an opportunity for leadership. And I think that's probably that a leader up the chain would say, how do I get other people to be better leaders? How do I help people to have more initiative? How do I use their skill set so that they build confidence in themselves? From there, they may end up, building confidence, talking more to people, and finding themselves leading others.
So in other words, if we're talking about the CEO of a company, they still need to be managers in terms of their direct reports.
Yeah.
If I'm understanding correctly, they can't only focus on, let's say, working on the company. They also need to be involved in managing some of the team members or direct reports. Does that sound right? Like what I'm trying to get at is, can you be the leader of an organization and just be a figurehead in a way?
I think if you abdicate leadership, if you're doing that, if you're just a figurehead, you're abdicating leadership. The most important thing a leader should do is to look for people. Why do I love Vistage? When I found Vistage 10 years ago, it was like I've never been happier. But because I'm dealing with the highest level people in the organization, and seeing them at different parts, like new into leadership or people that could teach me. I mean, that's the beauty of it. If a leader lets go, they're going to abdicate. They're abdicating their leadership if they're not actively managing. If they say, well, they're doing it and I don't have to show up, that's not going to help them. They have to show up. They may not need to be there 80 hours a week or 40 hours a week. They can be out, even less is okay. Because I look at, how do I help a leader to be significantly more successful by working less hours so they have time for their company and their family and their other interests that they have out there. The more effective they are at their time with people, the better. So a leader has to make sure that they have a team or a culture that is running. So hiring your top leaders is the most important thing that they can do, not only for the maintenance of the company, but for the future of the company. Because if something happens to them, just like the experience in the military, if something happens to them, somebody else has to take it from there.
Got it. You mentioned culture. A lot of people talk about company culture or, the culture of your team. I feel like there's maybe some different definitions of culture. And also for folks that are maybe not focused on culture day in, day out the way you are, there may be some confusion around what that really means. How would you define culture when it comes to an
I
organization?
don't think I have a textbook answer in my head. I think it goes to the culture is the behaviors that actually happen, whether they're written or not written. So you can have certain values on a wall, but if people are showing, like we're always on time, but if people aren't punctual, we're customer focused, but people are more worried about the dollars or whatever, then the culture is more about the other items. And the thing about culture, though, is that if you have 5 people in a company, may not, even though it's smaller, you have a better chance of getting into one culture. But there could be initially 5 different cultures. So you have 25 people. You can have each team might have their own culture. How do you align it to something that is greater good, that meets the needs of the customers, meets the needs of the employees, because the employees are part of that. They're the key aspect of the culture. And for the stakeholders, the investors, or the greater community that's out there.
How would you go about helping to form or mold the culture? For example, if someone currently has a company where the culture doesn't align with their strategy or what they're trying to build, how would one go about shifting culture in an organization?
I think there's a lot of ways. The way that I would do what I did when I did it is that I would begin with getting to know the leadership team. So I would begin with, a strategy is the first thing I started with, but you could start with culture first. But I would do assessments of the leaders, help them understand each other. I remember one of my more successful ones almost 20 years ago. I told the person that I wanted to work with, I said, you've got to make sure you have the right leaders before you start on strategy. They came back to me about a year later and they had 2 new leaders and they felt like they had the right team, and they did. And then we started that process with the culture. So assessing the people there. Then from the people, and it's the leaders who you begin with, it's not the whole company, clarifying the values of the people and getting real values, not, hey, I saw this company, I really like them, I'm going to take their values. What really are the values? I remember one company I worked with, they worked a lot with cement and heavy work and all that. And cement is one of the things before you put it in, there's a timing thing. It takes so much time for it to prep and to dry and all that. So all the prep work, it's like a big rush. So they worked really, really hard to hit whatever it was to get whatever that project that needed to be done. What did they do when they were done with that? They played hard. They had competitions. They would have competitive volleyball and whatever they did, they just would go all out. So it was play hard, work hard, play hard. It was who they were. And all the other things that they wanted to be and to be successful, they need to know that. So then there's that clarity, and then coming out to a vision that's more than about making money. And I always look at, I look at Jim Collins' his hedgehog concept as ultimately you've got to figure out what you're best in the world at or can be. What are you passionate about? So if you're not passionate, so if you take that company, let's say they were the best in the world at delivering concrete, and they were passionate about winning, because if they didn't do it right, it had to be redone. But everything they were passionate about winning, and then there was an economic engine. I think the passion of what you're best at and play and what you're passionate about is more important than the economic engine or how you make money. It's ultimately, but I could for a real drive, but ultimately you got to figure it out because you got to fund your passion. If you're not making money, you're in a hobby. And you have to balance all those. So a mission that helps get the most out of people becomes really, really key. Recognizing that people are important is another key on a culture, because if you're not dealing with people's actions, then you can just say, hey, we're going to do all these processes and procedures, and everybody comes in is going to follow this process, and they're going to do it this way. And all we're going to do is turn humans into robots, and we're going to get it done. Well, the human side is that how do they really behave? They can play a robot and then they can go do something different. Or they can do their robot job really quick and then they can do the stuff they really want to do. how do you create their what they want to do in terms of making what the organization does better? So the culture changes, recognizing that you have people and getting to know them. I would use a StrengthsFinder from Gallup. I've been using that for almost 20 some years. And it's, what are the things that you're really great at? What are the things that you strive for? Gallup has been a great tool for me. It's also one of the key things that helps people get better. You want to put people in a position where they do the things they love and not do the things that they don't love. I would go down and get to know all the people. I would use the strength finders and I would ask questions about their success, and I could connect them to what they were great at, and I could define why they were successful based on what they were doing. It was kind of fun because the movie Office Space, where you have the Bobs that come in and they interview everybody so they could figure out who they could get rid of. I remember I was called the Bob, and I looked like, well, no, it's kind of the opposite. I'm here to get to know you and know what your strengths are, so that you can be developed and be made better. And I think that was why it's successful, because people knew that they were there in order to get better. And I have a strong belief that everybody has great abilities and everybody has potential. I mean, I look at people and I see potential, and it may not be what they're doing. It may be something completely different. And you find them and you go, they may not fit in that company, but I might know another company that they would fit better in. And it's kind of like a win-win. So know the people, have a vision on where you're going, have a methodology in order to get that, to get you there, and communicate on where you're going or what you're doing. And in all of that, you're developing leaders along the way.
When you mentioned the Gallup, I remember I took that test with you, and it was extremely accurate, but two, it helped clarify for me what I should focus on or what I want to focus on when it comes to my day-to-day or my work environment. Can you give an example of a situation where that skills test or the strengths test provided some feedback that really changed someone's trajectory? And I'll give my example was, I think the strength was being futuristic or something along those lines.
Right.
And that really helped connect the dots for me in terms of, I love strategy. I love looking at new acquisitions, seeing how they can fit with our company and stuff or what a community can become if we take over. Do you have any examples like that you can share?
Actually, I think you could be a good example with you and Steve, in that I think it's finding what you're really good at and finding somebody you trust that's good at the stuff you hate. Okay, Steve is very competitive. He's very process oriented, and he wants to get things done, and he has this knack for high quality. Like Steve can't be in something mediocre. And so you have a vision of high quality, but you don't want to execute it. And so Steve, you say, here's where we're going. And Steve's going, yes. And then he's, working and developing other people along the way in order to figure that out. I did it with a nonprofit, a lot of people but a nonprofit leader. And she said, and strategic was this, the Gallup Strength Finder or the Clifton Strength Finder, as they give it to Don Clifton. And she was strategic, and that changed her directory to say, or her direction on where she went, to say, I am strategic and I am thinking strategic, and other people don't think strategically in the way that they do. I did this with a trade association. And I had a variety of people, understanding them, and they had a great strategic plan, but how did they execute it? They had a guy that needed to make that would go out to a variety of organizations and get funding for the projects that they were doing within the trade association. He was in sales, but if you ever told him he was in sales, he wouldn't do that. But if you looked at his strengths, those were the things of getting out to people, talking to people, hanging out with people. That's what they loved. What he hated, is that he was a program manager. He had to do the reports on that. And apparently I heard stories where he would sit in his office and he would stare at the Excel spreadsheet for 3 hours. And literally that's what, and because he didn't want to move forward with that. So there was another person that he was working with that loved that type of stuff. He would say, dump it on her. Well, she loved that stuff. And we defined that his role, that it was okay for them to pay her to do those things because he was good at it, because he needed to be out with other people where he thrived. He loved that. I remember hearing stories about when COVID came, he didn't want to do the Zoom stuff. He didn't want to go to Kentucky. He wanted to go to Iowa, and he found excuses to get out as soon as he could. And that was 10 years after. It was like, you need to spend more time with people. Find somebody that doesn't love that and do less. And then sometimes you have a leader. So I'll focus in on CEOs. Many of the CEOs that I have, they get there because they have a drive, but they understand their drive. Now they have to figure out who they need to delegate to and who are the details that they need to delegate that to. So by looking at their strengths, this is one of the things I just love to do. Is like, here's who I see based on what the more, and I'll do this for companies if they want to. I'll sit down and work with them and say, now that I know all of this, kind of hack into their culture, here's where I can see that you could where you can move people around.
That makes a lot of sense. And what you mentioned about Steve and I is very much accurate and the case. I banged my head against the wall for almost 10 years because I was doing things that I didn't enjoy. And some of it I had to do in order to get to the company to a certain place.
Oh, yeah, but, absolutely. As you learn. And then figure out how to fund it so that you can pay for other people besides yourself.
Yeah. And now I'm doing, I would say like 90% of the things that I enjoy in the company. And it's leading to more success for the company and a better environment and all those things. Coaching played a big role in that. I know you're a big believer in coaching. How or when should entrepreneurs, business people look to get coaches involved in their lives or their careers, or is it just all the time or at any point of your career?
I would say everybody needs a coach, no matter where they are. If you look at where you were, and when you were young, and you're playing soccer or whatever, and you have a coach that helps you, and then your teacher in a way is a coach, and your parents are in a way a coach as they teach you. You might find an adult or an older kid that helps, and they can mentor, and the element of mentor, you figure out who you want to be around, or you hang out and you learn from them. Everybody needs a coach, whatever it is, and whether it's a formal coach that you're paying for or an informal way that you're doing it. It's just a way to make you better. Unless you want to you're fine with what you're doing, and you're not, if you want to grow. And I don't necessarily mean I want to grow in leadership. Professional athletes have coaches that are focused on them, that are not even the company coaches. They have people that are helping on how they eat and a variety of different things. If they want to make a change, you got to find a coach to help you do that. My wife is not one that likes exercise, but she loves Pilates, and it's something about the environment that has made that change. But it's a coach in there that helps her to encourage to do those types of things.
You bring in a lot of great speakers in Vistage.
Yes.
So for those who don't know, if you're a member of Vistage, there's monthly meetings and monthly one-to-ones with your chair or coach. One of the speakers you brought in was a fitness coach.
Yeah.
And he mentioned he trained with like LeBron James and a couple other high-level athletes. How important is it for CEOs or any business folks, or really anyone in general, to be well-rounded in that they're not only learning about or focused on growth in terms of business, but also, your health, well-being, family, other things?
Oh, I think that's, when I look at a member of a group, I'll say this to someone: I don't really care about your business. I care about you. You are the one that the business happens to be an extension of you, but it is not who you are. It doesn't define you. And you also have to understand that if you're only about the process or money, that's not helping you to be completely who you are or potentially happy. You need other avenues to look at and help. I make sure I have a health speaker at least every other year. I have different speakers that I know certainly need to make sure I always have to have a sales speaker. There may be CEOs that don't sell, but they need to be aware of what other people are doing. So they might be in their lane, but they need to be aware of other people, what they need to be doing. Our speakers, and we have the larger speakers bureau. We have thousands of speakers that are specifically focused for CEOs. There are 600 people like me in the U.S. We rate them, or our members rate them, our CEOs rate them. They make sure that if they're not worthy of being in front of a CEO, they're not getting a 4 or 5 out of 5. They're not coming back, and it helps to create stronger thought leaders that are very helpful. So we want to make sure it has impact and they have at least a quick takeaway. They're not all the same speakers, and sometimes you need to toss out something on more and more AI. So you need an AI speaker. I had a sales speaker I had years ago. I brought him back because he has sales with AI. I had him in January, sales with AI, because he realized ways to apply everything he learned in sales and how do you apply it with AI, which is a different viewpoint. The different perspective of the people that are in a group, for instance, helps you to realize that there's other things that you may not be thinking about. There are some people that are really, really good with people and some people that are bad with people. Or not bad with people, it's just not their natural. They can observe somebody good with people and how they can do that. And then the speakers are kind of like an extreme because they're really good at what they do and they help us. So that variety, I believe, helps add great value to the development of a leader.
You mentioned the sales in AI. So you did not ask me to say this, but I believe you're referring to Chuck Reeves.
Yeah.
He was on the podcast, probably episode 20 or somewhere around there, if anyone wants to check it out. But that's the quality of the person that's coming in and speaking to a room of 10 to 12 people, maybe 15, somewhere around there. So it's very much one-to-one or very tailored to that room of people. And I think there's a lot of value that comes out of that versus going and seeing a speaker who's talking to a couple hundred people.
Yeah. And the great thing about these speakers is that they see the value in the relationship they have with Vistage because these are their potential clients. And if they can get in the room with 16 CEOs, and one, they usually give that they get something, but somebody's going to say, help me go deeper. I had one member that hired Chuck for his sales meeting, and Chuck was happy about that. And Chuck goes the extra mile for people.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you're also involved in a manufacturing conference that's going to be coming to St. Louis next year. Before we talk about that, we're both passionate about St. Louis. Can you speak on some of what St. Louis has going for it? Because there's a lot of negative press that comes out, like we were saying earlier, about the region as a whole, which I think some of it, maybe 1% of it may be warranted, but there's a whole lot of good in St. Louis. There's a lot to be positive about. There's a lot that I think backs up the notion that some of us have that St. Louis is positioned for growth at some point in the near future. Can you speak on some of the positives that the region has going for it and then kind of how that manufacturing conference came about?
So, yeah, I think St. Louis is a big, small town. It was at one time the 4th largest city in the U.S. Probably the reason why it didn't continue to grow was because and so there's a lot of his history. The barge leaders were the strongest, and we wanted to put trains in St. Louis, but instead of you had to put a bridge over the barge there, and so that didn't work. So the train industry ended up going into Chicago. Now we have some great trains in St. Louis now, but that's why Chicago started to grow faster. So St. Louis is there are different mistakes, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think a big city is a bad thing because I would say there's a lot more crime going in Chicago. There's a lot more crime going in the bigger cities than there is in St. Louis. It's a small, big town. And a lot of, because it was the gateway to the West, there's a lot of industry that have come in here. And what I think one of the strengths of St. Louis is that we have a lot of those companies have stayed private. or they have grown and they've had a huge impact on the rest of the community. So, and I tried to figure out, because we do, I think we do. If you look at different cities, we have probably more stronger private companies than most other cities that do. We have I go back on the education. We have a strong Catholic community. We have a strong Lutheran community. They're both very, very focused on education, on having good educational systems in St. Louis. And then we have some non-denominational private schools that are good. And I believe our school districts we learn from each other. And so we have some great school districts that we learn. I think it's the Midwestern values that you can see. It's a relatively friendly community. You can go to different areas in the community. We're an extremely giving community, so there's a lot of philanthropy that goes on into St. Louis. We have one of, and at one time the largest, and I don't know, a United Way, where it's people will come together. The United Way, gives the money out to, in a very systematic way, they give the money out to the community based on need, and they have an allocation board in which they do that. So, and that's because we have strong leaders in the community that are business leaders that are going onto those boards. We have a lot of great not-for-profits. If we look at, in our group, we had the Variety, the children's charity, is in, Brian being in the member. The history of Variety, we have one of the strongest varieties, which is children charities. And the board has helped make sure that the money that comes in is effectively used. Even though we're relatively small compared to others, we still have one of the largest scouting organizations. Our scouting is very strong in St. Louis. I think I remember when my son was in scouting, it was number 2 in the country. And so we have that ability to grow and develop. And I went through leader training, so another leadership experience with scouting. And I'll tell you what, that's probably some of the best leadership development training anywhere. So the number of Eagle Scouts that are coming out of St. Louis, they are helping grow the leaders. And if you look at some of the great schools that we have, they're focused on creating really good leaders. We have the different challenges where we have the race, separation. And I think that's a blemish, but I think there's different ways in order to make that actions that have been taken to improve that in our community. And I think we have some really strong minority leaders in St. Louis. If you look at Worldwide Technologies, it's hard to beat that company for what they've done, and then that just breeds other people to say, I can do that as well, in terms of what they can do. I think in my work, I've worked with a lot of minority-owned businesses, and I've seen the good work that they have done for others in the community in order to help other people. I think if you look at the positive impact of the Bosnian community that came in, I think we're very welcoming to people that are immigrants that are coming into St. Louis. And the International Institute of St. Louis, they just did a great job in helping with other people. One of my members was a Jewish immigrant from Belarus, and what she has done in the company where she hires hundreds of people now with a variety of different cultures, it makes a difference. We also can communicate fairly well, and I think you can look at the downtown, but you can also look at Clayton as a way, is the county seat, where in some cities you can't get to every place quickly. Here, I would say I can get to anywhere in about 20 minutes for the most part, and then you got to go a little further, but for everything. So if you need to get together and communicate, we can get together in person and to do that. We have a lot of great not-for-profits. We have great schools in WashU, SLU, UMSL, Webster University, Maryville University, and I think that has been very. So there are a lot of little things in our infrastructure that makes a difference. One of the things that I do on my spiritual journey is that I go to a different church every Sunday. It is something I've been doing for the past few years. It helps me to see the, a lot of churches and what they do for youth. It just thrills my heart to see a church that is developing youth. So we have people, a lot of faith in St. Louis, which is a strong aspect of what we do. And I think we have people that we know we have problems and we have a desire to solve the problems, and people come together and try to solve the problems and come together. And I think some of the leaders are working hard to try to connect on that. And I think the way that business communities connect and we connect in our other organizations like the Vistage come together with strong YPO in St. Louis and EO, a variety of different ways for us to connect and get to know each other and build together. So I just listed a whole bunch of stuff that just came off the top of my head, but does that answer your question?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I love to see it. I love to hear it. I personally feel like St. Louis is one of the greatest metro areas in the country. And it's just a matter of time before it's, quote, discovered by others. We just had, I saw this the other day, we just had our largest increase in foreign-born population year over year, which is awesome. And I think probably in great part to the International Institute that you mentioned. The only thing I would add to what you said is better weather than Canada as well. Other than that, your list.
I think we have
a
lot of things, but we also, the other thing is that we have a great park system. Forest Park's 3 times the size of Central Park in New York. We have Tower Grove Park. You have a lot of the parks, but all around us, and being close to the Ozarks, the wine country that's nearby. We have a great riding trails that we're focused on and working on and getting better. And the weather, we have all 4 seasons. I would say the strategically, we are in the center of the country. We have strong barge and we have strong rail, and we have roads that you can get to anywhere, and that adds. And there's another thing that people might not think about with our energy. Our energy is cheaper than other communities as well. So that's not on the human side, but it is on a financial side. It's cheaper to buy gas here than most other places in the country, and the electricity that we have also helps.
I'm assuming the manufacturing conference happening in St. Louis next year that you're a part of, I'm assuming that's happening because manufacturers are interested in St. Louis. And that last piece you just mentioned, is that a big part of why they may be interested in looking at St. Louis?
I would no, actually. So one of my Vistage members had asked me to lead a manufacturing consortium in St. Louis in 2019. So it was something I do outside of Vistage. I originally said no. And because if you look at, I have two CEO groups, a key executive group. I do 2 emerging leader groups. I wasn't doing that at the time, but I've got, developing that and another group. I just didn't have time. But I look at, so the other thing I'm big in is collaboration and how do people collaborate? And I put an emphasis on that. When I looked at this company, Cambridge Air Solutions, and they inspired me on what they did on employee engagement, in continuous improvement, process improvement, and lean, but getting their employees to come up with ideas to improve things. And so I've been observing them inside, going to having these Vistage meetings there when they would host, and seeing some of the things, watching some of the young people that were there to grow and get better. When they came to me on this, they said, we have a consortium. So this is associated with the Association for Manufacturing Excellence, which is an international organization that has the largest conference for manufacturing for continuous improvement in the country. And it's in Chicago, it's in San Diego. It was The next one's coming up in Atlanta. There was one in Toronto. There was one in Dallas. They would have a conference and they would do tours at these conferences. And then occasionally somebody would say, hey, let's go to Salt Lake City and see this company because it's really cool. Or let's go to this company, and you would have people go to them. The concept was, instead of the international conference where you do 30 tours in 3 days and you see a lot of companies in that area, why not create one in a particular area? So there was already one in Chicago. There was one in San Diego, one in San Francisco, in Rochester, and a few other cities. And they wanted one in St. Louis. And because of the work I had done with their COO and the key group, they thought I was a good peer group facilitator, which nobody goes to college to be a peer group facilitator. There's no peer group facilitator group in there. And so I thought about it. My mission is to strengthen St. Louis, and I do it through the development of leaders. I'm not that great with schools. I don't know enough about them. I hope somebody else is really good at that. And I love what I do with Vistage, but I also saw this, and another reason why I do, going back on leadership, I like the different levels of leadership, which is why I have a key group and why I have the emerging leader group, director level and below, that are potential growing leaders. What the employees, the more you can get your employees, the more you're going to create, engage, the more they're going to create better leaders. And I said, I will do this as long as you help me connect with other companies. I don't want to be the ones finding the other companies. They said yes. I had to look at it from a peer group facilitator. I had a background when I was at General Motors in the Wentzville plant. They trained me in continuous improvement. There's lots that I learned, but I'm not an expert. I'm a peer group facilitator. So we started in 2019 doing tours, and Cambridge did the first one, and we had a few others. We have our zoo is actually involved, our world-class zoo, because they're trying to find ways to make themselves better. They did a tour in January. SSM Healthcare was healthcare. It has to focus on continuous improvement, not necessarily manufacturing, but they do continuous improvement. The supply chain really became obvious during COVID. They did one in February of 2019. Then COVID happened, and we shifted to, the concept is do a monthly tour, and the companies will come see. It's not for consultants. It's not for anybody else. It's just employees of that company to see what somebody else does, learn principles of continuous improvement and operational excellence, and a big element of lean is people-centric leadership, which is fits who I am, and do tours. We shifted quickly to do virtual tours. And we would do virtual tours month in and month out before we could be together. And we ended up sharing it nationally, like other consortia or other companies within the association for manufacturing excellence would be there. And then we actually coached, I remember, because it's international, because one company really good in continuous improvement in England, because we could do the virtual, we did a virtual tour with them. But what I found is there's a lot of companies in St. Louis that are really good in that element of process improvement and continuous improvement. And what my emphasis is, I don't want to see leadership speak. I want to see employees speak. And so we've been doing these tours for employees to speak. I could not have done this without an assistant. I had, so I have to delegate that to the details. I had a great assistant that helped in what we did. And so we built momentum. And so we went through into COVID. We went out of COVID. COVID for me was one of the most rewarding experiences, because with my Vistage groups, we quickly learned what we needed to do. How do we do it? We communicated it fast. We had great experts on economists who said, hey, it's going to go like this. So be prepared for the jump. Don't dig your head in the sand. And with the manufacturers, it was like, hey, this is something we do to keep our employees safe. Here's a rule or a policy. Here's how we apply it. And so we went through COVID. We got out of COVID. It's harder to get out of COVID than it was, but we learned from it. And we built a great reputation in what we did in St. Louis with these great companies that we have. And we built a reputation nationally on how good our consortia is, and that we continue to do monthly tours. So it's been 5 years of doing some great tours, and we're adding companies. So the international organization, they came in to bring in senior executives to do what they call a champions club, to see what we do. And we did a day at Barry Waymiller, which is a great international company headquartered here. They don't have facilities, but they're here, and Bob Chapman was really big on people-centric leadership. He helped to put some guidelines for that. We had a half a day at Cambridge Air Solutions, which are known for their culture, and we had a day at Hunter Engineering, which they have an amazing organization and structure, the leadership that they have in terms of their dominating anything to do with a tire changing market, and just an impressive organization. And then we had the evening at the zoo with these executives, and the Association of Manufacturing said, we shouldn't be looking at other cities that we want to look at cities that have strong consortia. So a few months ago, they made the announcement that they're going to be here. So we will have well over 1,500 people come into St. Louis to see what we do. In 3 days, we will have 30 tours. We'll have 50 people on a bus, and then I'm still adding companies to this. But they're going to learn that, plus they're going to learn everything else that they do at this conference and the workshops and things like that. But what we did really well, and it reinforces the strength of St. Louis, is that we already have companies that are doing these continuous improvement things. We're reinforcing them because employees can go. It's not leaders that do the tour. You have people that are on the line are going to go see another company that does something completely different that they do, and they say, wow, you do that thing that we do. My boss isn't an idiot for making me put this stuff on the screen, and they do it better. So I'm going to do what they do, and I'm going to take it back. So it goes back to that area of accountability or a collaboration, a peer organization, different area of what they do. They can learn from somebody else, and it just accelerates that growth at what they do. So I'm excited for 2025. It'll be October 6th through 9th of 2025 downtown. And other people around the world are going to see that the strength of St. Louis is manufacturing and that the companies have that concept of continuous improvement that are not only making the products better and creating efficiencies, they're developing leaders, they're developing employees. And these employees are taking the skills, they're bringing it back to their churches, to their schools and their districts, or the leadership of what they do. I think that's all part of what we do, but we're celebrating something that we do really well. But being in the middle of the country, it saves a lot of costs for other people. It's easier for distribution. We have some really great distributors here. And with all the other organizations that we have, there are other ways that people are constantly growing and learning. St. Louis has always been strong in manufacturing, and it still is strong in manufacturing. And Missouri, as I went to the True Manufacturing facility the other day in Bowling Green, as they're going to do one of our tours in November in Bowling Green, which is a little bit, they have a lot in St. Peter's, but they're looking to spread out to have Missouri workers. And go back to the international, we have organizations that have multiple people that don't speak English in manufacturing. So as people come into St. Louis, we can take the lessons from companies that have a lot of that and learn on how do you bring in a workforce that just want to work and would like a job and an opportunity to make a difference and to build something. I think that just helps us to become a stronger community. And Greater St. Louis Inc., has a big emphasis on manufacturing. We've brought a lot of jobs. Boeing's going to be bringing in a lot of jobs here. But the Greater St. Louis Inc. says that manufacturing jobs are the ones that add more jobs. So you get one manufacturing job, you're going to get other jobs in other services around them. People are going to need apartments too, Raj.
Yep, I would agree with that. And thanks for sharing on the conference. If you have a link or anything with more information, we'll add it in the description.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you one more question on that, though. With onshoring and the U.S. potentially bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., do you think St. Louis is well positioned? It sounds like St. Louis is very well positioned. But
it is. One of the companies they were doing something in Mexico, and they found a way to do it here, in terms of the way to do it here. So they reduce them. And now Mexico is a great place to manufacture. I think you're more worried about where you have to have all the ships and the traveling and all that. If we can do some of the things that could be done in China, or you could do some of the things here, you don't. It goes back to the supply chain. And we have some really smart supply chain people. We have a great supply chain program at UMSL. And so we have the mindset to help organizations become more efficient, and not only to provide the workers, but to provide the minds on how can you prepare your facility to be more efficient? How do you prepare your supply chain or line up your supply chain so that you have you can get your product and build it when you need to, and also to be more efficient instead of building a lot of inventory that may or may not be sold.
Makes a lot of sense to me, and it sounds very promising for St. Louis's future.
Yeah.
We like to end each show with what we call a hole-in-one, which would be your greatest piece of advice that you can share with someone that they can implement in either their life or business today. Do you have some more advice you could share?
I would say more than anything is get to know what you're good at, do more of what you love, find out get to know other people and build trusting relationships with them, and to think about the potential of other people, that your children, or your grandchildren. My grandsons are probably what drive me more than anything. I'm very blessed. My kids are back in St. Louis, and I have my grandsons are in St. Louis, and I want them to want to be in St. Louis. And so, what is it their potential to see that? But you can see that with your children. You can see that with other people. Look at other people, understand who you are, do what you love, find people what other people are good at, help them to do that, but always help other people to become better. And ultimately, that's kind of the essence of leadership, is helping other people be better.
I love it. Thanks for sharing that, Jonathan. Where can people learn more about what you're doing and potentially connect with you?
So the easiest way is I've got a website at Jonathan at www.jonathanjonesconsulting.com. The Vistage at vistage.com will connect you to the Vistage generic, but my Jonathan Jones Consulting will also get you to jonathanjonesconsulting.com, and it'll also connect you to the Association for Manufacturing St. Louis Consortia. So that's AME.org is the Association for Manufacturing Excellence. If you go into the consortia, they'll have that. I think it's St. Louis AME.com or something like that. I don't have that one memorized. Maybe I'll give that email for the St. Louis Consortia. But if there are companies that you know of that want to get better, the AME is there. Any leader that wants to get better or preparing their next generation, I'd love to help them, or find another place or somebody else that could help them go to that next level.
Awesome. We'll be sure to link all of that. Thanks again for your time. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you, Laraj. Thanks a lot for this.